Welcome back, America. You get one free article from Foreign Affairs magazine, and I recommend it be the one that published last week, Why America Forgets and China Remembers the Korean War. Joining me now are its authors, Congressman Michael Gallagher, chairman of the Select Committee on the Committee on Foreign Affairs on the Chinese Communist Party, and Ian MacLean is co-author, I think he might be currently an aide to Tom Cotton. Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Ian. It's good to have you both. Chairman Gallagher, let me begin with you. Why did the Chinese communists denounce you and Ian after this was aired? Oh, we don't have Chairman Gallagher. I'll start with Ian. Ian, why did they blast Mike Gallagher after this article appeared?
Hey, good morning, Hugh. It's nice to be on with you. My name's Aaron MacLean. I'm with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies these days. And look, the reason I think that they denounced the piece was, first of all, they take Chairman Gallagher seriously. I think they recognize that he understands their game, and they don't want to give him an inch. And then I think the second reason is they realize that what we were saying about the Korean War was basically true. They have a very different lesson that they want the United States to learn from the Korean War. They want the United States to walk away with the lesson that we shouldn't have fought it at all, that we should have acceded to Mao's imperialism, and they would like us to take the same approach today. And obviously, that's not the policy that we would recommend for the United States government in 2023.
Now, Aaron, I apologize for calling you Ian. I'm just kind of scattered here as we try and get our technology to work. Aaron B. MacLean on Twitter, MacLean, and the article is available at Foreign Affairs. You get one free one. Give us the lessons, a summary of the big three lessons that we ought to take from the Korean War, because serendipitously, I just finished American Caesar, which is the Manchester biography from 1978 about Douglas MacArthur. So Korea is front of mind for me.
Absolutely. Well, look, the three lessons that I think are most important when you look at this complete failure of deterrence. Famously, Secretary of State Dean Acheson gives a speech in January of 1950 in which he outlines the American security perimeter in the Pacific. And he somewhat ostentatiously leaves South Korea and also, as it happens, Taiwan off of his list of the countries within the American security perimeter. This speech was then reviewed at the highest levels at the Kremlin. And only a couple of weeks later, Joseph Stalin, who really was first among equals, we'll say, amongst communist leaders of the period, gave Kim Il-sung permission to invade North Korea. Now, later, Dean Acheson's political opponents would claim that this was a kind of blunder and he had forgotten to include South Korea on the list, and that started the war. It's really not true. It was a fair, if ambiguously worded, statement of American policy at the time. As a consequence of American ambiguity and a lack of clarity even within the United States about what we would do if South Korea was attacked, Stalin and Kim, and ultimately Mao as well, decided to try their hand. And make a run at it. And they were gambling that we would not fight for South Korea. Of course, as often happens, American public opinion was horrified when the invasion actually began. Public support immediately swiveled in favor of support for intervention, and we intervened in what ended up being a very costly and damaging war for all parties, mostly, of course, the Koreans. The second lesson, I'll go through these quickly. You stop me when you want, Hugh. Second lesson is that the Chinese Communist Party has a much more sophisticated understanding of the interplay between political action and battlefield action than we in the West do. And they expertly integrated negotiations and military action in a way that really flummoxed the United Nations and the United States. And the third lesson is that in the course of the war, we were regularly hesitant to threaten escalation of any kind, which allowed the war to be prolonged for 2 years that it didn't, in my opinion, need to be fought. Finally, when Dwight Eisenhower came in and started threatening to do a lot of the things that Douglas MacArthur wanted to do in the winter of 1951, spring of 1951, the war came to an end pretty swiftly.
Yeah, Chairman Gallagher has now joined us. Chairman Gallagher, when Chairman Xi looks at the Korean War, what lesson do you think he takes away?
Well, if you can hear me now, Hugh, I think it's a bit of revisionist history. If you examine the highest grossing Chinese movie of all time, and forgive me, I couldn't hear what Aaron said, The Battle at Lake Changan, it actually starts with the evil Douglas MacArthur initiating the war, ignores the North Korean invasion of the South. And then the narrative that the party tells itself and its people is that the inferior Chinese volunteer army defeated a technologically superior foe on the battlefield through superior strategy, but more importantly, will to fight. And so the lesson or the message, I think, is obvious. It's that if the Americans test China's will to fight again, they will find themselves facing the iron will of the Chinese Communist Party, and notwithstanding all the guns, bombs, and planes we have, they will prevail in a modern conflict, most likely over Taiwan. The biggest thing that's changed, and this is explicitly what the party's propaganda mouthpiece said in responding to our article, between the early 1950s and the present day, is that China is much more powerful. And that actually happens to be true. They've made massive investments in their military. They're obviously expanding their nuclear capability. And so I think the simplest message is that China is prepared to fight over Taiwan and believes increasingly that it can prevail in a fight with the U.S. over Taiwan.
I'll be right back with Chairman Gallagher and Aaron MacLean. Their piece is entitled Why America Forgets and China Remembers the Korean War. I've linked it on my X feed, formerly known as Twitter. You get one free article. I urge you to make it this one and send it everywhere. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be back. All of this will be on today's podcast, and I'll play more of it in this week ahead because it's that important. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Chairman. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Chairman Mike Gallagher. He leads the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, and Aaron MacLean of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We began the conversation on the radio show. This will play on subsequent radio shows, but it's all on the podcast. This is deadly serious. What does Xi think? What does he think about America, and what did he learn from the Korean War? Chairman Gallagher, I texted you that I just finished American Caesar. You're an admirer of that book as well. Mao did not hesitate to attack America. And I drew away from the end of that book thinking, in light especially of what you wrote after I read the book, that Xi may not only not shy away from trying to take Taiwan, he might want a war with us because he doesn't think we'll last. Am I right to worry about that, Chairman?
Well, I think as I've often said, the only short war for Taiwan would be a quick Chinese victory. We would face enormous logistical challenges in resupplying or replenishing our stockpiles. Every war game I've played, we quickly go Winchester on key munitions, as well as surging naval power in particular to the Pacific. The Chinese also have means through which they could delay our ability to surge power. Recent revelations this week, for example, surrounding malware inserted into various systems around American military bases. You know what's interesting about American Caesar, and really what I find fascinating about the Korean War, there are many things fascinating about it. It is the scene of MacArthur's greatest triumph in the form of the Incheon landing, as well as some of his greatest failures. Foremost among them, perhaps, well, if we just put aside the question of civilian control of the military and his dispute with President Truman, his complete inability to understand the Chinese willingness to invade Korea. He meets with President Truman in this really sort of bizarre and unprecedented summit at Wake Island, and assures the president that the Chinese are not going to invade. And if they do invade, he will annihilate them, in part due to his complete faith and over-reliance on American air power. So it's this remarkable story of underestimating your enemy, mirror imaging your enemy. And I think the relevance in the present day is obvious in Ukraine, where we thought it was unthinkable that Russia could launch the invasion. And still, when we consider the balance of power across the Taiwan Strait, there are many, particularly those in the corporate community, in the financial community, who think that it is simply unthinkable that Xi Jinping could do something like this. But if history is our guide, I think we underestimate his willingness to test our power, to test the limits at our own peril.
Aaron MacLean, Chairman Xi strikes me as being driven by one overarching ambition, and it's not the best interest of the Chinese people. It's equaling or surpassing Mao. And in order to do that, he's got to fight and win a war with the United States. How much do you think that figures in his calculation of grabbing Taiwan? We can't hear you, Aaron. There we go. Go ahead.
I think, as he would have it, reunification with Taiwan is clearly at the center of his vision for what his leadership is going to mean, for what his legacy is going to be. And when he looks at Taiwan, what he is looking at and what we know he is looking at is the history of the Korean War. That's one of the reasons why Chairman Gallagher and I spent some time this year looking at this period, is because it's not just that we ought to focus on it and that the United States is entering a period that looks alarmingly a lot like the late 1940s and early 1950s, it's because we know the Chinese are examining it. How do we know they're examining it? Well, the highest grossing motion picture in Chinese history, The Battle at Lake Changjing, aired in 2021. This kind of slick Hollywood-style production retelling the story of the attack around the Chosin Reservoir in the winter of 1950-51. It's a surreal thing to watch. The movie shows the Korean War starting when Douglas MacArthur invades Korea at Incheon. That's how it depicts the start of the war, mind you, and an American bombing up along the Yalu. All these things, of course, are historically, fictitious or deeply misleading. She gave a speech on the 70th anniversary of the Chinese intervention of the war in October 2020, which is incredibly hawkish and threatening in its tone. Chinese military journals publish about the Korean War. Why all this interest in it? Because, well, it's the last time they fought the United States. And they think they have lessons to learn from that period that are going to be applicable in Taiwan. So I don't know if it's exactly that Xi feels like he needs to fight a war against the United States to burnish his reputation vis-a-vis Mao. I do think it's that Xi feels like he needs reunification with Taiwan to burnish his reputation. And if war with the United States has to be a part of that, he'd clearly contemplate it.
Chairman Gallagher, Xi does not have a good record. Yes, he crushed Hong Kong. They already had Hong Kong. He didn't have to crush it. He had to have a concentration camp with 1 million Uyghurs in it. That's not going to burnish his reputation. Mao killed 60 million people. If he wants to kill more people, he's got to go harder than that. What he needs, I think, is a conflict that he can hold up as a win. Do you worry as much as I do? Aaron doesn't, obviously, but do you worry as much as I do that he wants a shooting war with the United States?
My whole hypothesis is that, particularly if you look at the demographic issues that Xi and China face that will manifest themselves, particularly in the 2030s, really dealing with a demographic buzzsaw unlike anything any society in human history has ever dealt with, combined with their pure economic issues, real estate issues, things like that. If you see that sort of storm cloud on the horizon, it could make a dictator like Xi Jinping, and he is in fact a dictator, not a major decider, which was the euphemism that John Kerry used to sidestep the question. It can make him more risk acceptant in the short term. The other thing that stands out to me, as Aaron and I really went deep into the historical record in the early 1950s, is how much do you weight sort of the realpolitik of this versus the domestic politics versus a lot of the ideological issues? And it was clear to me, re-examining the historical record in a way that I didn't fully appreciate, in addition to sort of the raw power politics that Mao at the time was expressing, there was sort of this genuine ideological belief that China was at the vanguard of the international communist movement, that they owed something to the North Koreans, who, of course, supported the communists in the Chinese Civil War. And though there was bitter disputes between the two countries, there was in particular a disagreement over who would command the overall war effort, the North Koreans or the Chinese, once the Chinese got involved. There was, in a way I didn't appreciate, some underlying shared ideological interest. Now, fast forward to the present day. I think it's fair to say that Xi Jinping doesn't have a lot of alliances at all, let alone alliances based on shared values. But as I look at the Russian-Chinese no limits partnership, increasingly I view it as an alliance in opposition to America and our allies. It is an axis that not only includes Russia and China, where China is by far the dominant actor, increasingly North Korea. There was just a bunch of Russian military officials in North Korea. There was a Chinese official who delivered a handwritten letter from Xi Jinping. The Iranians are also part of this motley crew of rogue states right now. So again, the parallels are eerie between the early 1950s and the present day. We're confronting not just an ascendant Chinese Communist Party, but a collection of states who have a shared interest in combating what they call color revolutions in other countries, for which they blame America, as well as just taking America down and destroying ultimately America's leadership of the free world, if not the entire concept of the free world, such as
Chairman. I'm also convinced, having reviewed it, they don't really care about the level of losses that they take. If they lose 50 ships and 250,000 soldiers to seize Taiwan, I look at what they lost in the Korean War. They don't care. Do you agree with me about that? And if so, what do we have to do to deter them?
I completely agree. And this was a key finding if you review, in particular, the book that Aaron and I taught last week, This Kind of War by T.R. Fehrenbach, which I highly recommend to your audience. The communists at the time were far less sensitive to casualties in the way, which makes sense, right? Because they are not beholden to their public in the same way that American politicians, once Americans start dying, have to answer for that. And throughout the conflict, that actually placed a limitation on a lot of what we did on the battlefield. And part of what Aaron and I argue in our piece, and I think perhaps the most controversial argument, is that though Douglas MacArthur deserved to be fired for the way in which he was insubordinate, he had inappropriate communications with Congress, he repeatedly defied President Truman's orders in many respects, his basic view after the Chinese got involved in the war, in the fall and winter of 1950, and then famously after the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, was that we should either get out or we should be all in. And we shouldn't put operational or tactical restrictions on our troops, and we should be allowed to do things like bomb Chinese logistical supply lines in Manchuria. Now, the argument against that was a real one, which is that we didn't want to risk general war. But I do think it's fair to say that our hesitancy then results in what is the most overlooked period of the Korean War, which is the fighting that endured for 2 years as we negotiated under the UN cloak, to use Fehrenbach's phrase. We had over 500 meetings with the North Koreans and the Chinese and others in order to negotiate the armistice agreement. But at the same time, Americans were dying in large numbers on all these hills. They were playing king of the mountain with the Chinese and with the North Koreans in places like Baldy, Gloucester, famously Pork Chop Hill, Heartbreak Ridge. And so I think it is fair to say that the limitations we placed on our behavior may have prolonged the war, ultimately setting the stage for Eisenhower to declare in the 1952 campaign, I shall go to Korea, which he then does and ultimately negotiates the armistice in the early months of 1953, or really the summer of 1953.
Aaron MacLean, penultimate question. I'll go back to the chairman after this for the concluding one. What would you do if you had a magic wand? What would you do to deter Xi and the People's Liberation Army and the People's Liberation Army Navy from attacking Taiwan?
Sure thing. And Hugh, I need to apologize because for some reason I can't hear what Chairman Gallagher is contributing. I trust him completely, so I endorse everything he has to say, but you should stop me if I start to cover any of the same ground that he has. Look, the first thing I think is defense spending is too low and it's drifting in the wrong direction. We need to get back up to Reagan-era levels of defense spending, pushing up towards 7%, I would say, as a minimum to be credible. And then we need to spend it on the right kind of systems. I commend to your listeners, Chairman Gallagher had a brilliant Wall Street Journal op-ed a few months ago about building a quote-unquote anti-Navy, essentially a kind of equivalent to the PLA rocket force, which is the military force on the other side of this equation. They have spent the last several decades. I mean, they are building a Navy, but they've also built a network of missile systems, short, intermediate range, as well as pushing into some long-range systems that are meant to do what we in the United States would call anti-access area denial work, to keep our ships and resources out of the operational area around Taiwan, should there be a war there. We should answer that. We need to be denying their opportunity to or ability to operate in the same space with our own short, intermediate, and long-range weapon systems. We have them. We don't have enough of them. And I think, if anything, the war in Ukraine has shown that we have we should be glad in a way that it showed us this in time, that we have a munitions crisis. Our stockpiles are not up to the task. So enough spending on the right things. And there's other items we could talk about. And a stockpile of munitions is where I would focus if we're talking purely about military deterrence.
Chairman Gallagher, last question. It's clear to me after reading your article, American Caesar, and I began Fehrenbach yesterday at your recommendation in this article, I now believe more than I ever did that strategic ambiguity is the enemy of deterrence. People have to know what we're going to do with some specificity. Do you agree? And if so, what do you hope the president says and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense right now, this week, and for the next number of weeks that he's president, and their secretaries? How do they act verbally to deter Xi?
Well, 4 years ago, I argued that we should clarify strategic ambiguity, and that would actually enhance peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait for the reason that you mentioned. I do think, though, that whatever we say diplomatically, and this is the most important thing, needs to be backed by a credible military deterrent. We need to invest in hard power. And I think that's the ultimate lesson of the Korean War. That's the first lesson that we adduce in our article. That sort of diplomacy without armaments is like music without instruments. It simply doesn't work. So in the short term, that means we need to build an anti-navy. We need to invest in long-range precision fires that can sink Chinese ships if necessary. And we need those to be pre-positioned in the Indo-Pacific because we won't have the luxury of and time to surge them forward. And then over the mid and long term, it means we need a bigger Navy. And as you and I have been talking about for 7 years now, Hugh, we're moving backward. We need a new president and a new Secretary of Defense who are navalists, who will unapologetically make the case for rebuilding the American military, in particular with the Navy and Air Force in the lead, which I think leads to a final lesson. I think the lesson that to me comes through all these accounts of the Korean War, but in particular, Fehrenbach's book, This Kind of War. You need warfighting prowess. You need troops that believe in the mission, that are hard, that are trained in a harsh environment. If we allow the continued civilianization and politicization of the military, we're going to find ourselves stumbling into war and possibly repeating the ultimate sin of Korea, which was to send troops that were not trained appropriately, that were not ready for the rigors of combat. And that would be a tragedy that we would repeat, unfortunately, with the historical record just staring us in the face, begging us to learn the right lessons. So those are the things we need to do. Ultimately, it's going to require presidential leadership as well as better leadership within the national security community to get ready and invest in hard power.
This Foreign Affairs article is a triumph. I encourage all of our listeners and watchers to go and see it. Aaron MacLean, thank you. Chairman Mike Gallagher, thank you for your time. We will talk again, Mr. Chairman, about the CCP, but I appreciate your extra time this morning. Thank you, gentlemen. That's it for today's highly concentrated Hugh. We're going to go back now to some stuff we did earlier in the day, including Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire. Enjoy the rest of today's podcast. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio North, Midcoast, Maine. I am going to drive the length and breadth of New Hampshire today and then back again. And I'll be listening at the start on News Radio WJN 560 and 98.5 that gets northern New Hampshire. Then I'll be listening to Manchester WFEA 1370 and 99.9. Then I'll be listening in Keene to WKBK 1290 AM and 94.1. And all the way along, I'm going to hear what they say about their governor, Chris Sununu, deciding not to run again. But I thought I'd start out by talking to Chris Sununu about that. Governor, welcome back.
Hey, Hugh, how we doing?
Good. Should I meet you for coffee somewhere along the way?
Big gray building, goldish type roof, right in the heart of Concord, second floor. Come on up.
Well, I can't go through Concord. I got to get through Massachusetts. It's unbelievable. I have to go to Massachusetts today, and I try and avoid that state, and I love going to yours.
I'm so sorry. You have to go to Massachusetts. Just my sympathy.
It is. Governor, let me ask you something. You're not running for re-election. Why not?
Look, couple reasons. Number one, the state's in great shape. I mean, I've been here 4 terms. That's a lot. I do believe in term limits, and I have no doubt I could win again. But you know, at some point, you do want new ideas, fresh ideas. I think we've left it in a good enough shape in that a Republican come and kind of build on our record. For 20 years, basically, we didn't have Republicans. We only had one Republican governor for 2 years here in 20 years before I came along, and the state kind of kept becoming, unfortunately, a little more like Northern Mass. So we've really turned that around. We put it in great shape, and just the time is right. It really is. And so, you got to know when to pass the baton a little bit. And we got some great candidates running, to be sure.
Governor, boy, from your lips to God's ear about people getting out of the way after a while, self-imposed exit. Let me ask you something. We have not. I'm a Republican, you're a Republican. This is a Republican radio show, but I want independents and Democrats to listen to it too. We have not carried New Hampshire in a national election in a long time. Can it be done in 2024?
Oh, sure. No, it's all about candidate quality here. Look, we have really, really high voter turnout. We have really, really smart voters. They get really engaged on all the issues. But it's about the kind of character and quality of candidates sometimes. And it can definitely be won. Trump almost won here in 2016. I think he lost by like 1,000 votes or something. By 20, it had all gone really south for him. But no, if someone like me can go from barely winning the state by 2% to winning it by 30, having a good record of success, and you just have to know how to run and engage with people. So, yeah, there's a huge opportunity here.
Governor, how old are you?
48, and you?
I'm 67. The reason I ask that is I think we need a generational shift in the GOP. I'm not against Trump. I'm in Switzerland, all right? But we need a generational shift. I actually served in the same White House as your father did. And I can stay on the radio because it's a 3-hour-a-day gig, and I don't get anybody hurt if I'm wrong. But I just think we need to move to the Sununu, the Cotton, the Gallagher era, and we got to do it within 5 years. What do you think?
I think we have to do it within 5 months. No, I completely agree. Look, the generational shift that we need kind of steps over all of the politics and the drama and the craziness that the whole country is plagued with. And it's what grabs independence. It's what brings back suburban moms. It's what actually attracts young voters. Young voters in this country, the 18 to 32-year-olds, are going to vote in record numbers in 24 and then ultimately in 26. So they're going to keep increasing their participation. And I don't see any Republicans, candidates, or even the RNC, by the way, really doing what they need to do to reach out to that younger generation. It's not easy. I'm not saying we're going to get a majority of them in 24, but if you give up on them, we are toast, guys. We are.
We can't. You know what? I think you underestimate what Ron is doing on campuses. But let's not go there. Let's stay on the presidential. First, let me ask you: do you have a candidate to succeed you? Do you want Kelly Ayotte to run, or do you have anyone in mind?
I haven't endorsed anyone. Kelly Ayotte's great. You brought former Senator Ayotte up. She's going to run. I think she'd be a phenomenal governor, with no doubt. But I haven't endorsed anyone. I ultimately will, I think. But we'll see who gets in the race.
Now, I have been down already to see Nikki Haley when she came into Portsmouth, and I got to ask you about Portsmouth. That was a pretty happening place. Are they building more ships there? What are they doing in Portsmouth?
No, look, the whole state is really on fire for the most part economically. See, everyone is running up from Massachusetts, from New York, Vermont, Maine. They're all coming in. We've done everything from regulatory reform / taxes. Businesses want to be here. So we have now the lowest unemployment rate in the country and the lowest poverty rate. So no, we make it easy for people to do business, for people to keep their money, because it's their money. It ain't the government's money. And so we promote it, right? You can have if you have a great product, if you don't know how to promote it and get people excited about it, they won't come. But right now we're doing really, really well there. And Portsmouth tends to be, I'll be super polite and say extremely left-wing crazy. That's the politest thing I could say. But it is a great town. It is a great town on the water. It's a lot of fun. They got, but that's New Hampshire. You have your liberal towns, you have your conservative towns. You have your North Country towns. You have your flatlanders, like some of us that live a little more down south. So it's quite a varied state, both politically and otherwise.
All right. Now, that bathroom is still not fixed at the last exit in New Hampshire at the liquor store. I just wanted you to know that. I haven't seen any potholes, but I just wanted you to know that. Governor, let's talk about the presidential. This morning, Donald Trump in the New York Times poll is at 53%. His next closest competitor is Governor DeSantis at 17%. So he's got an overwhelming lead, and I don't know that New Hampshire's going to change to that. Do you?
Absolutely. No, look, so in national polls, I get national polls, but where's the conversation really happening? New Hampshire and Iowa. So let's look at New Hampshire's polls. I think the 3 of the last 4 polls, I think, from Real Clear Politics, has him under 40, right? I think he's averaging like 44% or something in Iowa. So where the conversation is, I think, wait a minute. This guy can't win. We might want to support him because of the political injustices going on with these indictments. I get that. But that doesn't mean you should be that generational change for president. So, no, those numbers are only getting worse. And it's not what he has, right? He's a sitting incumbent president, a former incumbent president. So, of course, his numbers are going to be decent. Think about what he doesn't have. From his own party, the hardcore base voter in Iowa and New Hampshire, the majority aren't with him. Think about that for a second. He was the flag bearer for our party just a couple of years ago, and the majority of his own party don't want him. So that's a huge opportunity for one of these candidates to start surging. And if we get it down to Trump and one other candidate, maybe even Trump and 2 other candidates, he's done. He really is. And look, I simply say thank you for the service, but there's no record there. There's no there, right? When he had Republicans, for all the Trump voters that are listening, just think about this for a second. He had Republicans in the House and Senate. He didn't build the wall. Right? He didn't show any fiscal discipline, adding $6 trillion. Right? Where was the draining of the swamp? What happened to that? Right? Did we just forget that memo? So even when he had Republicans, he couldn't get anything done. That's not going to likely happen again. We'll have probably the Senate will still be run by Democrats. And so the whole thing, do we want to change this country, or do we just want to make a point? You change it.
No, Governor, we are on across all of New Hampshire right now, or at least 90% of New Hampshire listening. Would you support Trump if he's the nominee? I will.
Oh yeah, that's not going to happen though. Look,
but you would.
And we're going to have a strong Republican, but no. I have no doubt, given where the numbers are. I think I don't think after he loses, I don't think he's going quietly. I'll tell you that. I mean, the guy, he's kind of a crybaby in that sense. He's always. Have you seen his speeches?
But Governor, did I hear you right? You will support him if he's the nominee.
Oh, look, I'm going to support the Republican. There's no question about that. But
that's what I'm going to do too.
Yeah. But he's not going to be the nominee. He's really not. And look, I get the national polls, but when you're polling people, no offense to Kansas, Nebraska, Idaho, nobody's paying attention to the race in those states. Where they're paying attention to the Republican race is where he's having the most trouble.
Is there a date certain for the primary yet?
No, what we typically do is wait till all the states call their primary date, and then we put ours in front of everybody. And that's understood. That's accepted on the Republican side. Iowa will go first with their caucus. We'll go first with our primary, and that's the way it's normally done. So I'm guessing it'll be likely in the end of January 23rd, 30th, something like that.
All right, so I'm coming back up here to Studio North during January in order to be close to that. Let me ask you now, again, keeping in mind the New Hampshire voters who are listening, the reason that Republican candidates come on this show all the time, including the former president, Governor DeSantis, they want to talk to New Hampshire voters. What should they say to New Hampshire voters to get their attention, Governor, and more importantly, their vote?
They should say they should not worry about policy. They got to show some character, and they got to listen. See, what I told Tim Scott, and I help all the candidates. I do events with all of them, and I was telling Tim Scott, a candidate, just as an example, that's got this great background story. And I said, look, make it shorter. Make your story a little shorter so you give them more time to tell their story. You got to connect with people on their issues, not yours. And don't start trying to impress people. I was talking to DeSantis about this and all that. I said, don't worry about the policy stuff. We got that. You got to be about character, about looking people in the eye. And you got to show that you're not just viable to stand on the stage. You're the one on the stage. You are the leader. You are the winner. You're the person that is going to inspire the rest of the party to get bigger and more excited. So it's really about kind of a little bit of that charisma and leadership that they got to show to folks one-on-one.
No, I want to close with this. Two candidates in particular, Vivek and Doug Burgum. And I want to start with Doug Burgum. I watched his speech in Iowa, and I'm in Switzerland. I'm not going to endorse anyone. They can all come on the show. I'll ask them all the same questions. I'm fair. But I watched Doug's speech, the governor's speech in Iowa, and I thought that is a 1976 Jimmy Carter vibe up with Republican issues. That was interesting. What'd you think of that?
Small town. He is a small town governor that connects. I mean, he grew up literally on a farm. He's completely self-made. The guy was a chimney sweep for many years, growing up on a farm. I mean, the guy. I love his line, and it's so true. He said, look, I'm the guy that always had to take a shower at the end of the day, not at the beginning, because he's just a hardworking guy that made himself. So he's connecting with people on the small-town, rural feel. It's not just about Washington and big city ideas. It's really about what's happening to the individual. Vivek as well. Vivek clearly also gets people very excited. I told him I had a great conversation with him yesterday, and I said, look, everyone knows you for the woke stuff. And I said, you have a great resume of running a business. You have a great sense of finance and balance sheets and economics. You got to talk about that a little more. You got to broaden it a little more. But he's really hooked people in and got them excited. He's incredibly well-spoken. I mean, the guy can deliver a speech and get people excited as well as any of the candidates up there for someone who's really never done it before. And I think as he gets broader with his message, there's a huge opportunity for him to surge as well. Same with Tim Scott. He's moving as well, which is kind of interesting. He's changing his approach a little bit, and it's connecting with folks. He's really kind of putting it on the ground. So this is so much to play out here. I mean, really.
Governor Chris Sununu, keep coming back. I'm going to give you a report on your state as I drive through it, particularly the off-ramps and the exits and all the bathrooms. So thank you, Governor. Good to talk to you as always.
I'm on the bathrooms. I'm working on the bathrooms first thing today, just for you, Hugh.
That's very funny. Thank you, Governor Sununu. Always a pleasure. Our high candidates, Hugh Hewitt. First day of our summer. Please help the poor of Central America and the Caribbean. The banner, emergency food relief, is at the top of HughHewitt.com. I do this every summer. This summer it's particularly critical because of the heat wave, which has struck all of the Southwest United States. And it's boiling the Caribbean and Central America. And food crops are failing, and food for the poor, which has been doing this for 40 years. Now, the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I led off the campaign this morning. We did so because even though I complain about my first world problems, I want everyone to understand. I understand their first world problems. And, I had many other people who are more inconvenienced than I was this past week. I met Brad and Shell, who had to spend the night in National Airport because of United on Saturday night. I got to a hotel, and I'm telling you, right, when I was in Newark, there was a Marriott on the ground. I got 3 hours of sleep. They didn't get that. They sat up all night. Nothing was open. I saw Paul, who's trying to get back to his 3-year-old in Maine. I saw so many different people completely screwed by the combination of weather and understaffing at United, and never fly United. But that's a diversion. Please contribute to Food for the Poor. The banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. Joined now by Morgan Ortagus, formerly principal spokesperson at the Department of State Art. One of my favorite guests. Hello, Morgan. Good morning. Okay, we're going to try again. Morgan, are you back with me?
I am.
Oh, good. It sounds great. Morgan, okay, tell us about what Polaris is doing in New Hampshire, because I've got Chris Sununu coming up shortly, and I think you're coming back to New Hampshire this week or next week.
This week, so this Saturday, we're really excited. We started our 2024 cycle from my policy organization, Polaris National Security. We started our first event in New Hampshire. We're very committed to New Hampshire for these events, Hugh. And what we're doing is we're asking national security leaders, some of them may also be presidential candidates, to spend an hour with us talking about American national security and foreign policy. So we are very excited to be there on Saturday. Since it's a Saturday morning event, so if you're in Bedford, it's the Bedford Event Center, this Saturday, 10:30 a.m. Listen, I don't know about you, Hugh. I don't like people to come to my events in the morning without some coffee and some donuts. So we will have them there. I think the name of the place is Lighthouse Local Cafe. I heard that their donuts are amazing. I'm a donut person. Are you, Hugh? I love donuts.
I would be, but for the fact that you've just got to watch every calorie and sugar count when you go over 60. Morgan, you can go out and run 20 miles. I can only do 6. The beach to Beacon race is this Saturday, so I can't come down to this event. And it's my annual 10K in Maine. Do you have a special guest? I didn't hear that.
Are you doing the 10K?
Oh yeah, that's my annual Maine race.
Awesome.
That's my annual. Who's going to be your guest on Saturday?
So this will be Vice President Mike Pence. We had Nikki Haley at the first event that you came to. We are trying to get through the presidential candidates. There's many of them right now. But it's important, I think, New Hampshire is such a critically important state. Not only is it an early state, it's a state with shipyards that are important to our U.S. Navy and our Coast Guard. And what we do in these events, I promise you, you're not going to be bored. You're also not going to get red meat thrown out, right, that you hear at some of the other events. You're not going to get a boilerplate campaign speech. I spend about half of the event asking serious and tough questions about China, about Israel, about our border, the most important national security issues, really quizzing these people on what they see, what is their view of the world for America, what they would do as president. And then we spend, and then I'm very good about this because I know how much all of you in New Hampshire care about this, then I really do give the rest of the time to the audience and let them go through the Q&A. And I got to tell you, I think people were really impressed with the Nikki Haley event because it's something fresh, Hugh, and something different that you're not hearing out from other candidates on the campaign trail. It's a serious hour. So we welcome veterans, or if you don't even have a veteran background, we would love for you to come. If nothing else, come get a free Lighthouse donut. I just looked at the website. They look amazing.
The national security questions that you posed to Ambassador Haley was excellent. I'm sure the vice president will. Yesterday, Dmitry Medvedev, who I don't know if you ever met or dealt with when you were a senior State Department spokesperson.
No, I met Putin. Not him.
Okay, Putin. Well, he said that Putin had told him and that there was a decree that Moscow would be forced to use a nuclear weapon if Ukraine's offensive is successful. Direct quote, Medvedev. Imagine if the offensive, which is backed by NATO, was a success and they tore off a part of our land. Then we would be forced to use a nuclear weapon. According to the rules of a decree from the president of Russia, there would simply be no other option. So our enemies should pray our warriors for our warriors' success. They are making sure that a global nuclear fire is not ignited. I've never heard a Russian as senior as Medvedev make that threat before. Have you, Morgan?
They were sort of veiled, making these threats about the use of nuclear weapons at various points. I think about 3 or 4 months ago is when it got really hot at one point when they were saying it. Medvedev has been sort of the drunk uncle on Telegram, right, saying these sorts of things. But I think it's incredibly important that you read this and that you pointed out, because it's clear that Putin is using Medvedev to get messages out there. Now, what do we know? We know that the Chinese Communist Party leadership, Xi Jinping, they have sort of, every time the Russians threaten nuclear war, the Chinese sort of pour some cold water on it and say, that's not what we want. That's not. And I think the Chinese obviously understand clearly that's not in their best interest. I mean, the Chinese were the Ukrainians' #1 trading partner before this war broke out. And they certainly are for many countries in Europe. So we should take these threats incredibly seriously. There's actually a piece that was good weekend reading, but you can still catch it today in Politico by Brian Bender that talked about how a lot of the people who are experts in the field of nuclear weapons in the United States, how that has sort of atrophied, and that we're actually at an incredibly dangerous time, because the threats of nuclear weapons during the Cold War were often met with seer and sober analysts on both sides, the United States and the Soviet Union, who would actually try to de-escalate those threats. And now you have a regime that is, quite frankly, dying on its way out. Russia is no longer the power that Putin thinks it is in its head. And so they might be willing, like a hurt animal, to lash out and to do things that would endanger the rest of Europe. This is why deterrence is so important. And when Biden and his team failed at deterring Putin from invading Ukraine, there are so many ramifications beyond the horrific loss of life of so many Ukrainians and so many children. That's the part that really gets me the most. And that aspect is terrible. But you have things like the real threat of the use of nuclear weapons whenever there is someone who is not in charge, and whenever people feel like, you know what, we can get away with this. And that's how Putin feels right now, unfortunately.
Now, I think someone should respond to Medvedev. Do you think the United States ought to put out a statement about this? If not from the president, then from Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken or Lloyd Austin? Someone should push back.
We should. And what has happened is every single time you read an article about this administration's policy towards Russia, look for the line, you'll see it, whether it's their excuse on delaying the Abrams tanks, whether it is their excuse on F-16s, on cluster munitions, whatever it may be. There is a line about how the administration doesn't want to do X because they are afraid of essentially of provoking Putin or making Putin lash out more. Well, the genie is out of the bottle, right? Putin has been provoked, he invaded, and prolonging this war is not in anyone's interest. I think that's where a lot of people can actually agree who may or may not want more Russian aid, more United States aid to Ukraine. We can all agree that prolonging this war is not in anyone's best interest.
Morgan, have a great event on Saturday. Please stay on the line. Dwayne's going to importune you to substitute for me on Monday. So we'll see if that works. If not, have a great event in New Hampshire on Saturday. My best to the former vice president, to every candidate that you bring up there. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live from Studio North. I made it back. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I made it back. I'm going to complain a lot about the airlines today, but I want to start with something else. I'm going to start with something else because I was full of fire and fury at the United Airlines and everybody else connected with airports in America. And I have a theory about why they've completely melted down, United especially, but also everything else. Many of you got melted down. But I went to Mass yesterday, which is always good. It's like a cleansing when you go to Mass. And I had my parish in Maine has got 4 churches in it. So you never know who you're going to get, but I love it when Father Steve is there. Father Steve is a wonderful homilist and Georgetown grad, Division I athlete, somewhat later vocational call, but not too late. So a young man, relatively young man. And he just gave it maybe one of the best sermons I've heard in years. It's on Matthew. Yesterday's reading, for those of you who know, was on Matthew chapter 13. The parable of the man who finds treasure in the field and sells everything to buy the field, the woman or the guy who collects pearls and finds the perfect pearl and sells everything to have the pearl of great price. And then there's another part of it. And it's all about, what's important. And the most important thing, of course, is your soul, because it's immortal. And every serious Catholic wakes up every morning and they consider four things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And so he kind of refocused. But he also asked this amazing question based on the first reading, which is almost always touched on, but very rarely illumined to the extent of the gospel reading. If you're not a Catholic, there are three readings. There's an Old Testament reading. There is a epistle reading, non-gospel reading, and then there's a gospel reading. So most of the time, the homilist speaks to the gospel. But yesterday, Father Steve stopped and he said the reading was from the Old Testament, Book of Kings. I think it's Second Kings, but I can't remember. This is why I say the Catholics know everything in the Bible. They just don't know where it is. And because they've heard it in chopped up bits over the period of their lives. And so God asked Solomon, what do you want? I'll give you whatever you want. And Solomon asked for wisdom. And that's a very good thing to ask for. And we got the Proverbs as a result of that. And we got the Song of Solomon as a result of that. And it's a very good thing. Now, he's not a very good king. He's very wise in some matters, but he's not wise in laying down the foundations. And then Father Steve stopped and said, what would you ask for? What would you ask for? I mean, he made people think, what would you ask for? And I thought, that never heard that in a sermon before. The Lord God Almighty comes down and says, you get one thing. What do you want? You've done pretty good. I'm going to give you one thing. And of course, if you get a second, you think about it. And I thought, well, I would like long and happy lives for my children, their spouses, my grandchildren, their spouses, their grandchildren and children and great-grand, all to the end of the ages. Long and happy lives close to Jesus Christ. That's what I would wish for. If God touched me on the soul and said, what do you want? That's what I would ask for. And then he went on to talk about the things that we get upset about and we don't want. And of course, I'm just full of rage at the airlines, and that deflates. It deflates. But I do have to say, I got a lot of news this morning, but I met a lot of I tried to find the upside of this nightmare. I have been flying for 50 years. And I told my granddaughter yesterday, I think I've had well over 2,000 airplane flights in 50 years. And I didn't start flying until I was 18. You didn't fly in the 60s. Kids didn't get on airplanes. I went on an airplane to New Orleans when I was 18 years old to go to the National Catholic Speech Finals. Yeah, I'm a geek. And that was the first time. And no one told me, if you fly with a head cold, be prepared. And, oh, my gosh, the excruciating pain. But another story. Well, I have never, ever, since college, I missed one plane in college, and it was my fault, the fault of my friend driving me, Regina Marie, who ran into a car on the way there because we were leaving late. It was hilarious. It was kind of a funny story, another day. So I missed one plane, and in all those 50 years, and no longer need to knock on wood because I've had my worst, I've never had a connecting flight cancel on me. And I always make my connecting flights because I never leave less than 90 minutes between them. Usually I prefer 2 hours because I don't want to miss my connecting flights because there's a little bit of delay at the gate or there's something going on. Well, not only did I have the nightmare in Newark on Wednesday night, where I spent the night in the Newark Marriott at the Newark Hotel and got 3 hours of sleep because the United Airlines lied and delayed, and then canceled the flight at 9:30. But I spent the night at Dulles, at the Beltway, where I had a place to go. My daughter-in-law was traveling up here, so I actually got a little silver lining. I was able to help her bring the baby, the sweet one, the smallest one, the youngest one, and it was kind of a nightmare at Reagan National. They canceled it after we had been on the airway. Now, the delays, I understand. I don't understand the Orlando delays. It was delayed in Orlando 4 times, so we left late. So I had to run like Usain Bolt, to make the plane. People said, I actually said, why is Hugh Hewitt running? And so, people know who I am occasionally. And I'm sprinting to make the gate. The gate is closed, but they let me on. Hooray, I win. Well, then we stay for 3 hours on the runway because of lightning. I understand that. Lightning is dangerous to the people who work on the runways, and lightning is dangerous if you're taking off. The storm clears. We taxi out. We're on the go line. Lightning strike, wait 10 minutes. Okay, storm is clearing. Lightning strike, wait 10 minutes. Storm clears. Planes are taking off. We're going to get there. announcement from the pilot. I am very sorry. I've extended my duty 2 hours already, and we have to go back to the gate. Really, union rules. Union rules. This is United. But here's the deal. It's food for the poor time. And you take all that, it's really sinful to be as short as I was with so many people mentally. I had a wonderful time. I met Brad and Shell from Charleston. They spent all night at Reagan National. And by the way, that's the worst airport in the world to spend all night because nothing is open. It's not an all-night airport. It's not like Dulles and Newark. There's no hotels. There's nothing. It's a little airport. They had spent all night sitting up in Reagan National. And then I met Jennifer on one plane. And it turns out there's a Nixon Foundation connection there. And then I met Paul, who was trying to get to Portland, who's just had a fascinating life. He grew up in the county. They call the county in Maine, which is from the far north. So we had a wonderful time talking. So, I mean, there was good stuff. There's always a silver lining. And then I met the most interesting guy I've met on an airplane ever, a former ambassador to Azerbaijan who'd spent 40 years in the State Department. We have a lot of friends in common. I mean, I don't know many State Department people. And we just talked about secretaries of state and the country he's been in. So, I was the inquisitor. I gave him full disclosure. I'm a journalist all off the record other than I'm talking to you. We had a great time, but I was still frustrated with everything because it was a nightmare. Never missed a connection, never had a plane canceled. Happened 2 out of 3 days. I think I got a total of 12 hours sleep over 3 days. Came home and collapsed. But then I read the materials for Food for the Poor. And I have no problems. There is no food in Central America right now. There is no food in Haiti, because of a variety of conditions and the climate and the heat that's going on. Everybody's starving. So I sat down with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt last night, and we made a 5-figure donation this morning. And we did that because we can afford to. I mean, I'd rather go buy a boat or something, but we did that. And I'm going to ask you to dig deep because it's a bad situation. And so we put the emergency food supply banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. And I would ask you to go over there and join us. I'd ask you to, whatever you can do. You can't do $10,000. I know some of you can, if you can do it, but you can give 10. All right. Lots of you have given $10 to candidates to make the ballot, and I think that's great. Some of you give $100 every year. Some of you give $1,000 every year. Some of you give $240. Whatever it is that you can do. Please go over. I'm a one percenter. So the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I can swallow hard and do that for Food for the Poor. And we can say to you, I don't ask you to do anything we don't do. I always contribute to our charities. Never that much, but I just thought, all right, I'm going to expiate. That's not what you don't go to confession. They don't tell you to give that much money to anybody to do anything. They don't give you no priest ever tells you to do other than a little penance that is minor, 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, and say the Rosary. I mean, that's a hard one, as opposed to what you normally get. But I just say, if you're frustrated with anyone today, instead of being frustrated, help save some lives, because we got plenty to eat in America, and we got first world complaints. We're not starving in Central America. I'm talk about it for the next 3 months, 3 weeks. But go to Food for the Poor. The banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com, and please be as generous as possible, because the fetching Mrs. Hewitt said, you got to do it. Go do that. And I did. I do whatever I'm told to do. Coming back, a Brian the Banker update, plus the news of the day. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. New York Times headline this morning, new poll. The New York Times Siena poll, Donald Trump is at 50%, Ron DeSantis at 17, something like that. It's or 19. And, I just do not put any stock in polling this early in the cycle until after the debates begin. And really, you got to, 54% for Donald Trump, 17% for Ron DeSantis, 3% for Pence, 3% for Scott, 3% for Nikki Haley, 2% for Vivek Ramaswamy, 2% for Christie. That, by the way, I also think is going to be the debate stage, plus Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor, has qualified. And enough polls have Doug Burgum in the hunt that I think he will qualify easily. He gave an Iowa speech, by the way, that I watched, and I said to myself, this guy is sort of like Jimmy Carter in 1976, a Republican version saying Republican things, little-known governor from a small state, in this case, North Dakota, But the difference is Jimmy Carter wasn't a billionaire who made that money the old-fashioned way, earning it. He's a very accomplished two-term governor, and he was very direct and very self-effacing. Mocking yourself is always good stuff. But this is where I think you begin to watch C-SPAN to get not interviews and not hosts trying to make moments, but candidates delivering messages that they do all over the country. Here's Governor Burgum at Iowa on Friday night, cut number 30.
As a matter of fact, Catherine and I, two of the best days of our lives have been spent in Iowa. The first was when the North Dakota State Bison beat the Cyclones, and the second was when the North Dakota State Bison beat the Hawkeyes. Yeah. What? Too soon? Too soon? Come on. That was 2014,
all right, so
2016.
Stop. I think if you can talk knowledgeably about Iowa football and give it to them a little bit, that's good. It's like when Danny Perez, the Florida speaker designate, was on my show, and I gave it to him a little bit about Florida State, and he gave it right back to me about the #1 Buckeyes. That is good campaigning. So I like that. Burgum, cut number 32.
My dad was a World War II Navy vet. He died my freshman year in high school. My mom, now widow, 3 kids, back to work. So I understand what single working moms are all about. I had just about every job you could imagine. Shoe shines, swathing grain for local farmers, working at the local grain elevator, even paid my way through college, working as a chimney sweep. I've held all those jobs where you take a shower at the end of the day, not at the beginning. Imagine a president who understands the real work that Americans do every day.
For a second, has anyone used that line before? Generalissimo, has anybody ever used that line before? I had all those jobs where people take a shower at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day, because I think that line, people take a shower at the end of the day, I had jobs that people take a shower at the end of the day, is a grand line. Have you ever heard it before?
I have not heard it used in American politics, but it is very much a good working class mentality. I'm not an elitist. I'm not a politician. I'm a grunt. I've been working just like everybody else.
I worked at the local grain elevator in the Iowa Lincoln Day dinner parade of candidates. I worked at the local grain elevator.
Right.
All right. That might have been a Jimmy Carter line in 75, 76.
Yeah. I got my hands dirty. I know how to actually work for.
And I'm a farmer. I'm a farmer, and I know your football teams in North Dakota. I
literally bet the farm on starting a business. I mean, it's a good line.
Don't sleep on Burgum. I mean, he got 2% in the polls, but don't sleep on him. Cut number 36. This is Doug Burgum getting serious.
National security, we've got to recognize the real threats to America. Growing up in a small town, you learn the enemy isn't your neighbor. It's not the person down the street. We should be uniting this country to fight against our real enemies: China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, Mexican drug cartels. 110,000 overdose deaths in our country in the last year because of fentanyl coming across an open border. National security includes border security, #1. I've been down there. I've been down there with our troops. We've got to solve that. Took Joe Biden 2 years to get to the border. I'll be there in the first 2 weeks.
All right, I got to play for you a couple other candidates. Chris Christie yesterday, not in Iowa, but on CNN with Casey Hunt, used a line which I think is going to be a feature, a staple. First time I've heard it trotted out. Cut number 18.
Look, he's not even clearing that bar. I want voters to listen to this. It is most likely that by the time we get on the debate stage on August 23rd, the front runner will be out on bail in 4 different jurisdictions: Florida, Washington, Georgia, and New York. Out on bail, Casey. I mean, that doesn't even clear the low-class bar that Donald Trump is advocating for. Look,
stop right there. I got to get thinking about that. This question arises in some conversations. I don't ask it because it's a hypothetical. Cut number 13. Nikki Haley.
Well, what I've said is if he is found guilty, that is certainly showing that it was dangerous to our national security. But I'll take you back to Nixon and Ford. I mean, I think that one of the things we have to look at is not what's in the best interest of, the president, but what's in the best interest of the country. We have to move forward. We've got to quit living in the past. And I don't want there to be all of this division over the fact that we have a president serving years in jail over a documents trial. I want all of this to go away. It's why we have to have a new generational leader. It's why we need to move forward. We can't keep living with indictments and court cases and vengeance of the past. We've got to start going forward. American people are not talking about these indictments.
She says, I'll pardon him. Says, I will pardon Donald Trump. Vivek Ramaswamy, cut number 20.
The standard I use as our next president is what moves our country forward. What is the right thing for the United States of America?
Right, and would having a president like this move it forward?
The right answer is to move on, and I would pardon him. I intend to be our next president, and yes,
I want you to know we got Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy on the same day that Chris Christie is underscoring 4 indictments and the former president being out on bail by the time of the first, but from 4 different cases. Vivek and Nikki saying, I'll pardon him. You'll never hear me ask that question on this show. You'll never hear me ask that question. That is a question from legacy media designed to embarrass Republicans. Donald Trump made some pretty tough statements over the weekend. Let's play it again. Cut number 4.
Well, now this deranged lunatic named Jack Smith, who's been overturned unanimously by the Supreme Court, he's tried to destroy many lives. You ever see the picture of the guy? It's like central casting. Deranged Jack Smith and the DOJ will probably bring another case along with the DA. We have a racist DA in crime-ridden Atlanta. I loved Atlanta. Like Philadelphia. I love Philadelphia. But it's the worst per capita crime city in the whole country.
Big speech in Pennsylvania last night. But he basically concedes he'll be under indictment in 4 states. He's conceding Chris Christie's point, is what he's doing, is that he'll be under indictment out on bail in 4 states. And it's going to be very difficult. If I'm moderating these, I'm not asking him about that. I'm asking about the future. We are close to a war with China. People don't know that. I've got Mike Gallagher and Ian MacLean on later. There's a shooting war in Ukraine which can go to nuclear status. I just think there's stuff other than, I think it's all a charade, by the way. I think it's completely nonsense. The documents case is nonsense. The January 6th case is nonsense. We have the Brandenburg status. I think the Manhattan thing, even left-wingers agree that Alvin Bragg is a moron and just brought that for political reasons. And the Georgia case, there is no case there. I'm sorry, I've heard the tape. There is no case there. It's a politician begging him to look again. It's just not, it's all just foolish. But if he's found innocent 4 times and he doesn't get the nomination, or he loses the presidency, I would love Democrats to consider what the country will think. Say it's Trump versus Biden, and I'm not saying it's going to be that. I'm Switzerland. But say it is. And Trump has been found guilty 4 times or is in trial 4 places or the trials have been postponed. And then he's found innocent, but he loses the election. And he's been found innocent, not guilty in 4 different places, and he ran through that and he got the nomination. I just think these political prosecutions are the worst thing in the world for a republic. We've never seen it before. It's absolutely banana republic stuff. Ron DeSantis was in Iowa. Cut number 25.
This is our chance in 2024 to send the Biden-Harris administration to the dustbin of history where it belongs. We have to rise to the occasion. We have to fight the good fight. We have to finish the race, and we have to keep the faith. The time for excuses is over. We must get the job done. I will get the job done. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Cut number 26. Go back to the beginning of the speech. Cut number 26.
I'm proud to be the only candidate running for president on either side of the aisle this year that's actually served in a war. I served in Iraq. As a naval officer alongside Navy SEALs in Fallujah and Ramadi and places like that. Not exactly Club Med, but it was duty that called. And, I had opportunities to do a lot of other things in my life. I was a blue-collar kid. I worked minimum wage jobs, didn't necessarily have anything handed to me, but I put myself in a position to do well. But then 9/11 happened. All volunteer force. I said I need to do my part, so we served. And
people to understand, he's very careful because I saw him accused of this. He never says he's a SEAL. He deployed with SEALs. SEALs take with them a JAG and they take with them intel officers. My son's an intel officer, and has deployed with SEALs in Iraq and Bahrain and UAE. And they always have intel people and lawyers with them. They always do. But they're not trigger pullers, right? The SEALs are the SEALs. And he never says he's a SEAL. I saw that slander this weekend. Cut number 27 got a big applause line out of this about Anthony Fauci.
We will usher in a reckoning for those like Dr. Fauci who perpetrated COVID-19 lockdown and mandate policies. Those policies were destructive for this country. They hurt people, they hurt our economy, and we still haven't fully recovered from it. You don't coddle bureaucrats like Dr. Fauci. You bring them in and you say you are fired, and we are going to hold them accountable for what they did.
All right, so that was just a little taste of all of this. If you want the grand old pot, I've got lots more Republicans talking to Republicans, and I am a Republican, and therefore the grand old pot is something you need. But to get it, you have to subscribe to the Universe. I do it on Monday and Wednesday. Dwayne does it on Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday, weather and airlines permitting, and we're both able to do it this week. All 5 shows, because we back. Somehow Dwayne got back yesterday. I don't even know how he got back.